Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Managing Your Perimeter. My name's Mel Lukens, and along with Anna Reel, we have an exciting episode to bring to you today. And what better time to do this than at the start of school again? And I know that strikes fear in the hearts of many parents, having had to put my kids through 12 years of, first morning going back to school pictures. This is taking a little bit of a different tack than what you may be used to. Anna, how are you?
I'm great, Mel. I'm dealing with a little bit of an allergy cold today. So the pollen count here in Nashville is off the charts. I don't know what it's like for you. Is it like that in Virginia?
Yeah, we're getting hit with some rain right now, so it's kind of tampering that down. So, not too bad, but I'm in a perpetual state of allergic to, air.
Well, hopefully I won't sound like I'm underwater. And just like you alluded to, but also college football season kicked off last weekend, which I had a great time watching all those shows. I'm not shy. Roll Tide Roll. Roll Tide Roll. Sorry. Always got to support my kids. That's how we're going to do this. But yeah, here we are again, managing your perimeter. We're super excited about these podcasts. We especially love it because people are calling us to be featured. So kudos to us. We're making this very cool and a lot of fun for a lot of people. Each episode, we give you a behind the scenes look at what goes into security for events. We cover the products and people to make the events work. And there's so much more out there. We're making it happen with all these episodes and we love it. And we're super happy that you like it too. But like Mel alluded to, schools are back. And there's lots of dialogue and how students should maneuver the masks or no masks, vaccination or no vaccination. It's a never-ending conversation right now, which makes today's topic perfect. Deconflict and security. The most visible components of security are personnel and hardware, but those are just aspects of a larger story. The right mindset is also a huge contributing factor to successful security outcomes. We're joined by Jason Russell, founder and CEO of Secure Education Consultants, affectionately known as SEC. Yeah, I could go on all day with the college sports references, but it's also yet another acronym that our listeners will learn about today. And we're not surprised because Jason is a former service agent, so he's also very familiar with acronyms. SEC is based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. They provide high-level training in various areas of emergency response. Today, Jason is going to be telling us about the different techniques he teaches schools and companies when considering their security protocols. We'll also discuss how to deconflict in times of emergency. Jason Russell, happy to chat with you today, and thanks for being here.
I actually wanted to interrupt for just a second before Jason starts on his rant and specify that the other SEC that you don't want to be involved with has to do with insider trading. So with that, and Jason, I'm sure you've never heard this. I'm sure you've never heard it before. The other fine point I want to put on this is we're really ramping up our game because our subject matter expert, Jason, has also appeared on numerous network news shows. And if I'm wrong, don't correct me. So we really consider him a subject matter expert. Jason, it's your turn to brag on yourself.
Well, thank you guys for having me. And I chose SEC specifically because then people would be afraid to not open my emails. So
yeah, it works.
You put it in the subject line, people think they have to open it. But yeah, I'm, super excited to talk about what we do at SEC. And obviously with going back to school and everything that's happening in the world right now, we're having probably one of our most unique years in terms of the start of the school year. So we're busy and we're excited to have things somewhat back to normal.
That's perfect. But you want to just give us a little bit of background, like what is Secure Education Consultants?
Yeah, absolutely. So I founded SEC in 2012. And really the reason I started the company is because I'm a dad. I have 3 kids. My oldest is now a junior in college. But at the time that I founded it, I had a son. My son was in the infant room of childcare. And it was shortly after the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary. And I actually talked to his teacher in his classroom about what she would do if something like that happened. And her answer was honest, but it was disturbing because she said she didn't know what she would do, but she thought she would probably run. And I said, well, what about the kids? And she said, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. So it was pretty apparent that there was a huge gap in terms of what schools and childcares were doing when it came to safety and security. And I think that's really what SEC was built to kind of fill that gap. So we focus on not only the physical security, but more importantly, the processes that surround security. One of the things that we found, or that I found pretty quickly, was a lot of people have the right stuff, like they have the cameras and the locks and the stuff, but they don't use it correctly. Right. So they think merely having it makes you more secure when in fact it really doesn't. You have to use it properly, and you also have to understand how to respond in an emergency. It's just like emergency plans. You see these huge binders sitting on desks or on bookshelf, but that binder doesn't do anything in the emergency. You have to know what's in it. So what we do at SEC is really kind of comprehensive and granular in that we look at not only the physical security, but we look at emergency plans and response. And then we have a really strong focus on training. So, the Navy SEALs have a saying that in emergencies, human beings don't rise to the occasion. They sink to the level of their training. And one of the things that I found was missing almost universally was training. What do people actually do when there is an emergency? We have all these theoreticals and, we have these beautiful plans with tabs and color coded, but when the rubber meets the road, I wanted the teacher in my kids' class to know how to respond if there were an emergency. And that's really what SEC was founded to do, was really to make sure that we were actually bringing substance and reality to emergency preparedness. So we've been in business since 2012. We work with schools, childcares, and now businesses in all 50 states, and in fact, internationally. We're definitely the largest childcare specific security consulting firm, but we're also among the top in K through 12. And then, like I said, we work with businesses and our clients are so diverse. I have the ACLU as a client, and then I have tech companies. So we work with kind of everything in between, and we're really kind of full service. So it's not only, just one time we come in and tell you what to do, but we actually stay with you and make sure that you're implementing the things correctly. And then we're available to our clients for any questions or concerns they may have as they experience issues.
You bring up a really interesting point that's been drilled into my head, but not in the professional way that I'm sure from your time in the Secret Service is from the training standpoint. I mean, you train, and I'm sure I know you guys are doing this, but you train until it's muscle memory and that it becomes almost instinctual. Quite frankly, I think about the Reagan assassination attempt where you see Jerry Parr, the detail leader, just pushing the president into the limo. You see Tim McCarthy, who was, one of the shift agents, put himself between the protectee and the threat and become wide. I mean, puts his arms out and tries to become bigger than he is. And for that training, he took a round in the stomach. So I'm certain that there are so many similarities between your previous adventures and careers and what you're trying to do now. I mean, how much of that gets translated to what you're doing now?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, because a lot of what people don't understand about emergency response is all the physiology that comes into play. The reality is human beings were designed to respond to emergencies, but we weren't designed to respond to modern emergencies. So a lot of the things that happens to your body work against you in an emergency, which is why when you think about the Secret Service and police officers and Navy and military and how they train for muscle memory, because under stress, the areas of your brain that are responsible for problem solving become inaccessible. And that's the way your body was designed.
I'm always under stress.
Yeah, I mean, you're resorting to fight or flight or freeze, hardwired emergency responses, which aren't necessarily good in all emergencies. So to your point, our goal is to actually try to teach people ways and techniques that they can train themselves so that their response will be muscle memory, even though they can't train to the level or certainly the frequency that you would train if you were a Secret Service agent or you were a police officer or Navy SEAL. So we have to give them other ways to do it that are simpler for a civilian who's maybe working in a classroom or working in a factory. So we have techniques that we can teach them that allow them to kind of get to that level, not quite to that level, but starting down that road at least.
So Jason, thank you. You're talking about all the different types of training, and where I got a little stumbled there was because you did talk about how the trainings are different with whoever, I guess, your client is. And so can you just explain a little bit of that to us? Because, you're going to get a teacher, you're going to get a corporate client or whatever. And, how do you approach that training different to each of these places?
That's a great question. And I think the way you have to approach it with a client is you have to understand what their threats are. We always approach a client with an understanding, okay, what is this particular client's, what are their vulnerabilities? What are the threats? There's some that are universal, right? Fire, weather, stuff like that. But really, depending on what you do, your threats can be dramatically different. So for instance, if I'm training an elementary school teacher, I'm going to train them differently than I would train a high school teacher. And the reason is because their threats are usually different, right? So the violent situations in a high school are generally internal. They're a student, there's somebody who's already been allowed in the building. So all the perimeter security that we do in those environments don't generally actually impact the situation. Whereas in an elementary school, the violent threats are usually external, right? So the security that we put in place to keep people out has a greater impact. So it's really a matter of saying, okay, what is the threats that this particular person faces? And even in a business environment, if I'm in a factory environment, right, then my threats might be a coworker. But if I'm in a retail environment, my threats might be somebody coming from the outside. So an understanding of how the threats are different in different environments is important so that I can train people. What do you need to look for, right? If it's an internal threat, then I need to be looking for warning signs, behavioral warning signs. This person is talking about being violent. They're experiencing stress at home. If it's an external threat, somebody I've never met before, then I need to be looking for nonverbal cues, right? What is this person doing that is maybe different than somebody else? The interesting thing about human beings is we're designed to notice them. We're designed to be observant of our environment. So coming from the Secret Service world, and when you're working at an event, you're looking for the anomaly, right? You're looking for the behavior that's different than everybody else. You're looking for the one thing that kind of sticks out, and that's what you focus on.
So the guy in the trench coat in the middle of the summer.
Yeah, we try to teach people the same thing. Look for the things that are different. Your brain is actually designed to do that. You just have to trust it. We call it the kind of sixth sense or spidey sense or whatever you call it. But truthfully, human beings are actually designed for that. We're designed to pick up on anomalies in behavior, anomalies in our environment, and we can use those to protect ourselves if we will allow for that. A lot of times we just disregard it.
So when I'm listening to you talk about all this training, who's on your team? Like, who do you bring in to help you? Like, what's that background? Is it all what you have? Is it people you've worked with before? I mean, where do you get these people?
Well, for the most part, I hired a lot of my old bosses from the Secret Service. So I have a lot of former deputy special agent in charge of the Presidential Protection Division, a lot of former special agents, but I have a Navy SEAL on my staff. I have a former chief of police. So one of the things that I found was it's the background is important, but it's also a person's ability to take information and explain it in a way that makes sense to another person. So you can have somebody who's a brilliant security mind, but if they can't pass that on in a way that makes sense to another person, then they don't do me any good. They're good for they're good for maybe designing security, but they're not good for teaching people. It was really difficult actually at first to really pick out the people because I immediately thought the big resume was what I needed, but what I found actually was that wasn't necessarily the case. I needed people that could translate to another human being. And that's a little bit tougher because there's a piece of it that's personality and there's a piece of it that's just understanding how people learn. And that was a challenge for us at first. But we've actually done really well at coming up with staff, and we've kind of diversified out of just the Secret Service world to be able to have people from a lot of different backgrounds, all security and law enforcement, but not all Secret Service.
Yeah, they got to be relatable and be able to express the message in a way that obviously your clients can understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's a heavy topic. So if you sit and tell people how awful things can be in an active shooter situation for 3 hours, what you actually do, if you do it incorrectly, is you make them more scared, right? So I always say, if you leave a training that I do and you feel worse than you did when you got here, then I've done a poor job. One of the problems that I found really quickly when I looked at other trainings was they were very much fear-based, right? It was bad things are going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. Just hope that you get lucky. And to me, that was unacceptable. I wanted people to say, hey, there are things I can teach you that can dramatically increase your ability to survive an emergency. And I need to pass that information on to you in a way that you believe, because I need you to believe that you can, right? It's not just that you can do it. If you don't believe it, then you're going to give up. And that's not acceptable. And I tell people in my trainings, you're not allowed, if I train you, you are not allowed to be a victim in one of these situations because it'll make me look bad, and I can't have that. So you better figure out a way to survive it.
Oh, that's perfect because, well, I don't know. We probably need you to come to us because I would crawl under a table very quickly. I mean, it's just a natural reaction. I don't know. I think about that. I think about that when I'm in, anywhere, concerts or big, venues or whatever. And I'm like, where am I going? What's my egress in this? And I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, I'm crawling under the desk.
We call that mental scripting, which is good. That's a training technique that we really stress to people is put yourself in a situation and then figure out what you would do, right? Because it's just an emergency is like a plague. Your brain wants a script that's saying, okay, tell me what to do, right?
Yeah.
So mental scripting is a way to say, hey, if this happens, I'm going to do this. Now, I don't want you to get underneath the table unless there's a good reason for that. But that's a technique that we teach people because a teacher in a classroom or a person that works in a business, they can't train every single day. They can't get the muscle memory that a Secret Service agent can. But if they can think through the situations in their head, then when the bad thing happens, their brain says, I've already solved this problem. This isn't something new for me. I've already thought about what I would do in this situation, and now I'm going to do it. And that's actually a really powerful technique. I always talk about it in movie theater. When I go into a movie theater, I have a very specific process that I follow. It takes me 3 seconds to do, but if there's an emergency, I've solved every problem that I need to solve already, which just saves me time, right? So I know where the exit is. I know where the exits aren't. I know where I'm at in relation to the exit. And that allows me to be able to speed up my process in terms of responding.
Yeah, I think that's so spot on. The whole scripting, the situational awareness, and the movie theater is a great example because when you take your seat, you know where you are, you know how many people are in front of you, to your left, to your right, behind you. Then you survey the exits. And if something breaks really bad, you know what your first priority is, what your second priority. If everybody goes one direction, you go the opposite to get out. To me, that's part of the whole security apparatus of just, plan, and use scenarios to come up, what's the worst thing that could happen and how would I react to it?
Yeah. And I think in like the movie theater example, I think it is a great one because I have a very specific place that I like to sit. If I come into a theater and somebody's sitting in that seat, I'll try to make them uncomfortable so they move so that I can sit there.
Sorry.
Perfect.
And I'm pretty good at it too. So you just stare at them funny or eat popcorn right in their face and they'll move. But because I don't want to sit in the middle of an aisle, I want to sit in the end. And if I take my son to the movie, I work him into my plan, right? I got to throw him over the side. I jump on top of him. He breaks my fall and then we can go to the car. So, there's a whole process that I do.
Love that self-sacrifice there.
Yeah. But he doesn't have to drive. So he's,
there you go. I'm landing on him. Then I'll pick him up and take him out.
Yeah. I'll get him out of there.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's great. Well, we talk about all of these different things and we're talking about how safety in schools is starting to change. And how do you see it changing? As we're still ever evolving in this COVID world right now. It's not ending. I talk about having an allergy cold right now, but everyone around me seems to be getting another variant or, another hit of this. So how do you see all of this changing with this topic that's not easy, and that's the violence in schools? So how do you see it?
It's kind of crazy what we've done it for good reason. But if you just were dropped into 2020 and you were working in a school and somebody walked up to your entry with a mask on, you would call 911, right? So we went
in a heartbeat.
You would panic. And I would tell you to panic because if somebody has a mask over their face, there's a reason for that. We went from that to if you don't come with a mask, we are not letting you in our building. So we had to adjust security based on this new threat, which created all kinds of additional security issues, right? So now I don't see your face, which means I can't read facial expressions. I can't judge those types of, most communication, even though we're communicating verbally right now, we are all this. I watch all of us on the cameras that we're on, and we're all using hand gestures and we're communicating non-verbally. About 80% of communication is non-verbal.
Yeah, I got in the bad habit of pulling my mask down just to show people I was smiling.
Yeah. So, we lost all that though, right? So we lost our ability to have that nonverbal communication and be able to take that in. And we also changed just the way we do security. We had to reduce contact points. Well, in order to reduce contact points in a school, you have to now leave things unsecured that you would formerly want secured. So we just had to adjust what we did And now I think what we're seeing is we don't really know when to go back, right? So we're in this kind of weird middle world right now where we're like, okay, are we back to normal, or are we still in COVID land where we don't want to touch things? And what it's also created that I think definitely was unanticipated was issues with what I call de-escalation issues or communication issues, right? So it used to be you'd have an angry parent every once in a while, it'd be a custody issue or just something, my kid got a bad grade or whatever. Now we're dealing with, the percentage of angry people has gone up dramatically because of the issues created with the mask, right?
Yeah, try flying on an airplane today.
Oh, trust me, yeah. So what we're dealing with now in security with schools, instead of the traditional, hey, active shooter or that type of stuff, is how do we teach educators to communicate in a way that reduces the likelihood that somebody's going to become violent, right? So we're spending a lot of time on this concept we call de-escalation, which is, it's a pretty common term, but it's really teaching communication, because what's happening is the mask is truthfully, it's a symbol, right? I'm a firm believer that the mask is a symbol of a power struggle. People don't freak out because you tell them to wear pants, right? It's a garment you put somewhere on your body, and we expect people to wear pants, and nobody loses their mind about it. But this mask has become something different. It's not to do with the garment; it's to do with this power struggle. So one of the things that we're really seeing with schools and what we're focusing on is getting them to understand, okay, how do I deal with these issues in a way that's going to reduce the likelihood for a bad outcome? So we're dealing with a lot of school boards that are having issues at meetings. We're dealing with administrators that are having a lot of issues with just people being angry about this. And that's probably the biggest, I think, unanticipated consequence of all of this is just, in some ways, I think it's become a positive thing because it's allowed us to teach communication, which truthfully, no matter what job you're in, a good portion of your time is spent communicating, right? Whether it's verbally, not, doesn't matter. You're communicating. And we don't ever teach that. Think about the number of times you've been taught how to properly communicate with somebody. And this has given us an opportunity to really focus on that and get people to understand that there's ways to communicate that can create a positive outcome, and there's the opposite. There's ways to communicate that can create the more likelihood for a negative outcome.
I think of the Loudoun County School Board meetings that you never ever in the past saw a school board meeting televised, right? I mean, and the news would not be about the school board meeting or the school board members, but that has just, and it's not, granted, it's not just the masks, it's the social upheaval, I think, that we have seen over the course of the last 18 months that is really driving a lot of this. It's contributing, it's not driving, it's contributing to the pent-up anger that so many people have right now, that's now starting to come out in school board meetings, in town halls, on airplanes. You name it, it's just seeping into the fabric of our society. Oh, I'm glad we got that recorded. That was such a great thing to say.
Yeah, no, look, I was on an airplane and I had the mask pulled up over my nose, but the flight attendant didn't think it was up high enough over my nose. And it became like she was going to make me pull this mask up. And what I realized right in that moment was there are some people that are taking this as their opportunity to express unquenched power. And that's okay. But what they don't understand is that sometimes creates issues. Now, I'm a fairly reasonable person, except when I'm driving a car in traffic. I did it, right? I didn't try to throw my drink on her, but I can see why there are people that would have an opposite reaction, because it was in my opinion, unnecessary. But we're seeing so much more of that. Here's the reality of this as it goes back to school security is there's a lot of pent up anger and trauma.
The anger, yeah.
And it's going to come out. And the reason I know that is because we work with a lot of insurance clients and we track threats, and threats are through the roof. Now, the reason we haven't seen as many school shootings is because we're not completely back to normal yet, right? So I think, unfortunately, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think we're going to see one of the most violent school years this year, next year, maybe, that we've ever seen, because of all of the issues that have led into this year.
Take a minute, go back to the insurance company. What kind of threats? How do you come across them? What, is it social media? Is it just observational? and then what do you do about it?
Yeah. So it really comes, I mean, obviously, when you're looking for threats, you want to look, where do people communicate, right? Especially the groups that you're focusing on.
Yeah.
So where do kids communicate? If you're looking for, that's where you want to focus. And it used to be really easy. And in fact, we used to actually do a lot of social media monitoring where we would actually look for keywords and phrases. And the Secret Service does this still. The social media companies, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, kids aren't on Facebook. Their parents and grandparents are on Facebook.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, me too.
We're there.
My kids aren't there. So we used to be able to do that. But what's happening actually is that a lot of the social media companies are really making it more difficult to do that because of the privacy issues, and they don't want the monitoring in their platforms. So generally the way we're finding threats is through reporting, right? So a kid will see another kid's Snapchat and will report it to their parents, who then report it. And a lot of times it's not direct threats. It's not, I'm going to shoot up my school. It's what we call veiled threats, which are, they're indicators that say, okay, this kid's experiencing some anger, this kid's going through something, and they're showing some behaviors that are concerning. One of the biggest things that I think the Secret Service has done for education, believe it or not, is impart the concept onto schools and educators that there are warning signs that precede attacks. There are behavioral warning signs. And the important thing about a behavioral warning sign is it's observable. I can see it. It's not conceptual, right? A behavior is something that I can document. This kid is doing, their artwork is saying this, or their writing is saying this. So the Secret Service has done a really good job of getting the education world to understand that if you look for the warning signs, right, the behaviors of concern, maybe a kid is talking about weapons, or they're talking about previous school shootings, or they're talking about self-harm, those things. Yeah, you can actually prevent some of these things from happening. So it's a big focus that we focus on with our clients is this concept of threat assessment, right? Behavioral threat assessment, which is look for the behaviors instead of waiting for the day of the attack, because we know that there are behaviors that precede an attack. Why wouldn't we look for those behaviors and try to prevent it from ever happening, as opposed to focusing all of our attention on the actual event? And that's really what I think schools need to really try to start doing.
Talking about that, the Secret Service report that I don't think gets enough credit. Wasn't that done like in 2002, something like that?
Yeah, there's been updates to it. So it's called the Safe School Initiative. And it was a research project that was based on a previous research project called the Exceptional Case Study Project, which was to look at attackers of high profile people. They just essentially adapted it to education.
And tagging on to your behavior is observable, taking that a step further is what doesn't happen is, Johnny sees Billy acting in a weird way, is concerned about his behavior, and does nothing.
But Johnny might not know what he's looking for.
Well,
so that's an education issue, right? So if I see something, I always describe it as puzzle pieces. Imagine you found a piece of a puzzle, but you didn't know there was a puzzle, right? You didn't know where to take that piece to.
You thought that piece stood alone.
You just thought it stood alone. But if you knew where to take that, you might take it to this central reporting point and find that there's 10 other puzzle pieces there that make up this picture. So what we're trying to get schools to understand is you have to have a way to gather this information in a way that it can be used, right? So instead of being
does Billy play with guns? Does his family beat him incessantly? I mean, like you say, there are so many different other variables. But again, I come back to the fact that with that single puzzle piece, it's not enough to motivate teenagers or young adults to go tell somebody else.
But you have to understand that they don't necessarily know that that's a warning sign.
Right.
So it's just like if you were never trained on how to drive a car and you saw a yellow light, it would mean nothing to you because there's no reference point for that.
It means go faster.
Exactly. Exactly. And if you're in front of me and you stop, we're going to have issues. So but I mean, that's really about understanding what am I observing, and why is this supposed to be important to me? So what we focus on with schools is, you have to, in order for people to know what to look for, you have to tell them, right? Here's some things if you see your friend talking about school shootings, that's a problem, right? If you see your friend talking about harming themselves, that's a problem. Some of them are obvious, but some of them aren't. And I think that's where we got to do a better job of getting people to understand, hey, we can prevent these things. this is actually, it's science. It's not like theoretical. We know it's been documented enough times that these consistent behaviors, and if you look at any shooting, whether it's a school shooting or just an active shooter that goes into a factory, I can tell you what happened in their background, and I don't even need to know who they are because it's so consistent. It's at this point, we have to start looking for these things or we're going to continue to have these issues.
And it seems from this report too that there was a high degree of or a high percentage of people that perpetrated a random act of violence actually talked about it ahead of time and either bragged or kind of discussed it, maybe in passing. And that, it's like the interview that happens after an attack. Well, he was such a quiet, soft-spoken person, but they probably knew that deep down inside there was a problem that nobody dealt with.
The thing with those issues are you could probably go around the country in any given day and find 10,000 people that made statements that could be considered concerning. And most of those 10,000 people never do anything. They'll never launch an attack. So it's like, what I always say is it's like mining for gold, right? You're going to get a lot of false, you're going to have a lot of dirt to get that one little piece of gold, but it's so valuable that you have to do it because the alternative is what we see, which is Parkland and Sandy Hook and all these other really awful situations that when you look at the Parkland shooter, for instance, you can trace his behaviors back to middle school. This kid and the interventions in middle school could have been therapeutic, right? So part of what we talk about when we talk about how do we get this kid off this path is what are the intervention strategies that we're deploying? So one of the biggest issues that I see all the time is all of the intervention strategies. We wait so long that we have no choice but for them to be punitive, right? And many times, instead of that pulling the kid off the path, it actually pushes them farther down the path. So if you look at the Parkland kid, for instance, his tipping point was being expelled from school. Well, if you'd have intervened in middle school and reduced some of his stress and tried to remove some of the motives that he had for committing violence, you could have used more therapeutic intervention strategies and probably never had the issues that he had in high school, where now you had no choice, right? You had to expel the kid. You can expel the kid without expelling the problem, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, that became all too true.
I have a question because that interests me in terms of like accessibility. If you're at a private school, that those kinds of resources and those kinds of interventions are probably a lot more accessible and able to happen because of resources. But if you're at a public school, less likely, a lot less likely. How do you think that can be like evened out, or what can be put in spaces where that kind of thought process even is just a little bit more accessible?
I think the problem is exactly what you just said, which is resources, right? And it's almost that we use this concept in law enforcement, which is what's important now. So if you were drowning in the middle of the ocean, are you worried about drinking water right now? You're not, because that's not important right now. What's important now is I need a life jacket. Once I get the life jacket, now what's important, right? Now I can move on to other things. So what happens in the schools that you're describing is they never get to that because their resources are so thin that they're just trying to survive, right? They're just trying. Well, what the interesting thing is if you look at violence in schools, it's not coming from the inner cities. It's not. It's coming from all the other schools. Now, there's violence in those schools, but the targeted violence, the active shooter situations, they're not coming from those schools. So there's a reason for that. And it's based on socialization and just kind of environmental issues that are bringing those issues more to suburban schools and private schools.
This is one of these deals where the public schools, while they are resource strapped, I also think, and this may be a little bit of a bias on my part, but I also think in the private schools where you're actually paying for the kid to go, like a tuition, sometimes I think their motivation is a little bit mixed up because they've got to weigh their actions against a bottom line as opposed to, it becomes a numbers game. And now I can't say that I have any evidence of that, but it seems to me that could add another inhibitor towards.
I've seen it firsthand.
Okay.
And that I've worked with private schools who will have an issue with a student and they'll call me about it. And I said, okay, what have you done with the parents? And depending on how much the parent is paying, it's a tough situation for them to be in because that's a customer, right?
Right.
In a public school, I can Kids are, they're interchangeable pieces, and I don't have any particular, reason to want to keep a kid versus another kid. So those are real issues that come into play. And many times you don't see the good interventions, even in the schools that have the resources, because they're essentially in a customer client relationship. So it becomes a little bit more tricky, and it's a political thing. And the reality is most of those kids will never do anything, right? So you can be wrong a lot and never get caught. That's the truth. You can be really inept. You can be terrible at threat assessment. You can be security a nightmare, and I see it all the time, and it will never be exposed because nothing ever happens.
Right.
Security is the only world that the better you are at it, the less necessary you appear. It's the because if you're really good at security, if you're really good at threat assessment, say you're excellent at it, then you don't have any incidents, right? If you don't have any incidents, nobody says, "Oh, well, that's because you're good at threat assessment." They say these would have never happened at all. The Secret Service goes through that every year when they ask for more money, and Congress says, "Well, wait a second, nobody tried to kill the president last year." They don't attribute it to the things we did. They attribute it to the fact that nothing was going to happen in the first place.
It goes back to that adage that we, and I include all of us in the security industry, have to be right absolutely 100% of the time. The bad guys only got to be right once. And I know I've said that on this show before, but it really, really, really is true. And that it's not insurmountable. It is just something that with knowledge and training and observational skills can be mitigated.
Yeah, well, I think security is a pendulum, right? So we're a reactive society. So we will do the minimum we can do. And I always say it all the time. If you were building a building tomorrow and they said, you can put fire protection in, but you don't have to, right?
Right.
You would make a calculation to say, what are the chances of there being a fire? And you would probably say, okay, I think I'm pretty going to be okay because I have fire extinguishers, but I don't need the sprinklers and I don't need all the high level equipment. You do that because you don't think anything's going to happen. The only reason you see fire protection in buildings is because they have to do it.
Right. It's mandated by the county or city or state.
Mandated. If it wasn't, people wouldn't. I can promise you, people would not do it. Because people make a calculation. It's risk reward. They make a calculation. Everything they do to say, is it likely? And it isn't. Right? A fire is unlikely. So I could probably save $50,000 by not putting sprinklers in my building, and I would probably never be exposed.
I mean, you can go to the actuarial tables for any large insurance company, and they're going to say the risk of this happening in any given instance is X over Y. And it's pretty, I mean, you're right, it's pretty low. But I think when you take that a step further, the reason it's pretty low is because you do now have all these rules and regulations and fire codes and things like that. So, it's kind of chicken and the egg or dog chasing his tail, one of the two, or see all the above.
Absolutely.
So Anna, please jump in here.
No, you know what? You guys are doing so well. And honestly, I keep muting myself because I've been coughing a lot, so I didn't want to interrupt any of your conversation. I actually am enjoying listening to all of this. And, part of it, Jason, when I listen to you, I'm trying to figure out, I'm a company that's listening to this, and what am I going to take from this? How do I call you? What do I do with this? And, what's that 5 best things you could offer somebody right now that they're listening to this and they're thinking about either bumping up their security or figuring it out for schools or a company? Because I really think on the company side, in schools only because my children are kind of out of school right now. But
hey, we would not be opposed to your suggestion to all of your clients to put fence around all their schools.
Well, that too.
Yeah. And we can definitely do that.
But we often do that. But here's the other that I say about fence. I think fence is great, but I always get the question about fence, like, well, we have a 6-foot fence, should we put a 10-foot fence? And I say, I don't know that anybody's ever walked up to a 6-foot fence or a 10-foot fence and said, man, if this fence was 4 feet shorter, I would climb it. I would launch an attack.
Yeah.
Because it's 10 feet as opposed to 6 feet, I'm going to go home and not do this. So
perception versus reality.
Sure.
Give me 5 top things that you think you could offer people right now.
I think everybody should probably at some point assess their current level of preparedness, right? Because what happens with security is like anything else. You need somebody to look from the outside to say, hey, here's what I think you're probably missing, right? Because what tends to happen in organizations is they have confirmation bias. Whereas we're doing everything right, and nothing ever happens. So we never really look to see, are we actually addressing the needs that we need to address? I work with a lot of companies that sell things, right? Cameras, locks, fencing, all that stuff. And there's a role for all of that, right? But I think an organization needs to look at what they're doing and say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish with this process, right? So an assessment is the biggest piece. The second piece is look at your process. Let's say you do put fencing because you want a nice solid perimeter, but your access is you put this great fence in, but then you have a break in the fence that's 20 feet and any car, truck can drive in. You've spent a lot of money on fencing, but your process is so bad that you now have this big gap you've created because your processes aren't good, right? Do we sweep cars coming in? What are our processes? And it goes back to that original thing that I said, which is you can have the right stuff, but not use it correctly. An example of that I'll use that I see almost every day in schools is if you were to go to a school tomorrow, you would walk up to an entry that was controlled, right? But what generally happens at those entries is they have screwed up their process. In other words, instead of it being used as an access control point, it's used as a really expensive doorbell. They buzz you in without ever asking you any questions. And then once you're inside their perimeter, then they ask you why you're there, right?
It's too late by then.
It's too late. So their process is bad. Their stuff isn't bad. Their process is bad. So assess your facility, check your processes, make sure your processes make sense. And when you're assessing, do it at a granular level. What I mean by that is you look at emergencies, which if you think about all this, we're talking about the ultimate reality of, okay, when something bad happens, what are we going to do? And one of the things I think organizations miss is they never actually take that. Here's the thing. Here's the measure we're putting in. How does this affect our ability to respond when something bad happens? Or what is it doing for us, right? Cameras are the great cameras. People equate things they can touch to safety. Well, I'll many times see an organization say, well, we got cameras all over the place. And I said, okay, well, what are you doing with those cameras? I'm like, nothing.
We want
Not really doing. They record things that already happened. We don't have anybody watching the cameras, so they're not security. They're essentially, they're good for evidence.
So when bad shit goes down, we can play it over and over and over.
We can watch it, right? So saying, okay, could you have taken some of the money you spent on cameras and maybe invested in something else that would actually impact a bad thing? So I think the granular level, because what we see in emergencies is the weaknesses generally aren't in the big stuff. They're in the small details, right? Communication, command and control. So assess your facility, assess your processes, assess your plans.
Mm-hmm.
Emergency plans are only as good as the knowledge that people have of them. So one of the interesting things about emergency plans is they've gone from, I graduated from high school in the early 1990s, and there was no such thing as a lockdown. I never heard that word, right? We practiced for tornadoes. I'm from Michigan. We practiced for tornadoes and we practiced for fire. We never
do earthquakes where you had to hide under the desk.
We don't have earthquakes in Michigan.
That was Southern Indiana. So yeah, we had those.
Yeah. So
Southern California.
Fire.
Yeah, good point.
And tornadoes. That was all we practiced for, right? So the tipping point, this is the number 3 point, but the tipping point was not St. Eric, it was Columbine. So post Columbine, we went from no emergency plans to ridiculous emergency plans where people were planning for things that have never happened in a school. I went to a school who had a plan for a meteor strike.
Oh, good.
Oh, written down. Somebody wrote this 2 times. Researched and said, "What do you do?"
This wasn't a Catholic school, was it?
What's that?
Not a Catholic school, was it?
No, I don't think it was.
Just checking.
Mel.
Sorry, Revelations.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So it went from we have no emergency plans to now we're planning for things that are never going to happen. And the plans were too complicated, and there was this kind of more is better. So we would look at emergency plans, it would be like tabs, they'd have code words. Schools were famous for using code words to describe emergencies. And they would use them for active shooter situations, like, chocolate milk is for snack or Mr. Danger's in the building. And I'm like, who are you keeping the secret from? The guy who's shooting at you? I think you could be just obvious.
We have a Rocky in the building. Go get Bullwinkle.
Yeah. So they went the other direction to where they were so complicated, people couldn't understand it. So now what we're seeing is a kind of a contraction back to basic concepts. So make sure your emergency plan makes sense. Number 4 would be train your people. And truthfully, to me, that's the biggest, which is train your people on how to respond. One of the things that we found, we've trained thousands and thousands of teachers, and I've had 6 people that I've trained that have been involved in active shooter situations post-training. I had 2 teachers that I trained a week before they were in Las Vegas and they were involved in the shooting at the concert. Both survived, both referenced the training as making a huge difference in just how they responded to that situation. Just having an understanding of basic concepts, cover and concealment, distance, movement, all those things that we talk. So training your people. And here's the amazing thing about it. I've had people been, like I said, 6 people involved in active shooter situations post-training that I've trained. Not one of them was the situation at their workplace where they were actually trained. It was in their personal. One of the things that I tell organizations all the time is what you don't realize when you invest in training your people is you're helping them for here, but you're probably more likely helping them in their personal life. So I think that's a huge thing. And one of the other things I think about training is you have to do training that's more broad-based than just active shooter. When we train, we will not do a strictly active shooter training because to me, I think it's irresponsible. Mm-hmm. It would be, and I use this example, it would be like going to a culinary school where they only taught you how to make macaroni and cheese, right?
Oh, I love macaroni and cheese.
Well, that's fantastic, right? Who doesn't love macaroni and cheese, right?
Favorite.
It's wonderful. But if that's all you learn how to, even though it's good, you can't eat it every day, right? So if I can teach you concepts that apply to all emergencies, physiology, decision-making processes, then you can respond to all emergencies, including an active shooter, but not just an active shooter. And then lastly, the weaknesses in emergencies are communication and command and control. Those are the 2 biggest weaknesses. How do we communicate and who's in charge? If you can handle those 5 things, you'll be much better as an organization than just overall emergency.
That's awesome. And I'm really sorry I degraded macaroni and cheese. I mean, you add some lobster. It's really
amazing. It is good. That's why I picked that.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what city we go to, Mel finds the restaurant that makes the best macaroni and cheese. So that's always good. Oh my gosh, Jason, honestly, I think we could literally talk for hours about all of this. This is absolutely incredible. And, your depth of knowledge with all of this is priceless for us.
Absolutely.
It goes hand in hand with all of the things that we're trying to do at Arcus. And, we just try to teach, our people also. I mean, we had the pleasure of bringing Jason in when we were working on one of the large conventions, and he spoke to our team about, it was a little bit about emergency preparedness, but it was about, an egress time if something should happen during the conventions. And he was great. And you drilled it down, Jason, so that our entire team understood it. And I was really grateful for that. Your knowledge is, like I said, invaluable. And, we appreciate your expertise and coming here and spending your time and just explaining all of this to us. I mean, this is not an easy subject. I've said this early on. It's not something that anybody wants to talk about. It's not something anybody wants to learn about, but it's important. It's important now, and it's important in the society right now and what we're doing. And, COVID, non-COVID, it doesn't really matter. We should all be aware of these things. And it's nice to be able to have you as a go-to person for this. So I appreciate your time and you coming out to help us out today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your service. Again, this really has been fascinating because, again, we're right at that time where kids are going back to school. Mm-hmm. We've been fortunate over the last few years that we haven't had a significant incident. So again, parents aren't
fingers crossed.
Yeah, I know. It's the knock on wood, say, 3 Hail Marys and hope it doesn't happen. But so parents aren't thinking about it probably as much as they should. I mean, the school teachers, faculty, staff, we hope are, but it just goes to show that by talking about it and raising the consciousness of it, I think just helps contribute to a safer society. Awareness
is everything, right? I mean, you need to be aware. However, a little bit, we can help our listeners with that. And, having companies out here like, Secure Education Consultants will help us. Jason, it's your chance to give a little plug if you want.
Yeah, you get the last word.
Well,
you can give a little plug.
Like I said, I love doing these things because I think I'm passionate about it. And anybody who wants to listen to me talk about it, I could literally talk for days and days and days. So,
all right. Thank you, everybody.
Be of help to anybody. SecureEd.com. Come to the website.
Say that again, because I probably stepped on you. Your website?
That's okay. It's SecureEd.com. So SecureEd.com. And We have online training. We have virtual training now. We learn to train on the Zoom platform and things like that. We also have an online version of our trainings that we can do. So we try to make it really accessible for people with any budget to really be able to do something to hopefully make themselves a little bit more.
Well, cool. And not that our listeners can see it, but that's just a hell of a nice windy palm tree and beach background.
No, I wish it was real.
Well,
I'm just
but-
sitting in a
well, I
very
still
stuffy
think
office in the gym.
As a side note, though, Jason, I am going to post your picture
Oh,
on our social media. Yeah, ladies, you might want to check it out. Sorry, Jason, had to plug that in there.
I'll send you the headshot
Yeah.
better than this version. Yeah.
You're happily married with beautiful children and everything, but
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, when did we become a
yeah.
dating site?
Whatever works. I mean, whatever
Yeah.
you feel.
I
hey,
guess.
come on, I got to bring people to the site. We got to do this. This is
Yeah.
how-
Well, remember, we've had this discussion before and I ain't going there. To look ahead a little bit, our next episode is going to be talking about cybersecurity. So everybody get on the edge of your seats and
Yeah. and the
wait till that comes out.
Well, the company we're going to feature is called Converge One, and taken directly from their website. It's a leading IT service provider in collaboration and technology solutions for large and medium enterprises.
Oh, that sounds like a marketing spiel.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
That's
I mean,
actually not to jump on their topic, but that's when I deal with insurance companies, that's the largest selling policy right now is cyber security
Cybersecurity.
insurance. And
Oh, wow.
any business, and I don't sell insurance, but I'm telling you right now, if you do have a business, you need cyber coverage because that's where everything is happening right now.
That's fantastic.
Awesome.
That's
Well,
fantastic.
what a great tease for our next
We're going
episode.
so we're going to bring them on the show and let them plug in. Also, let them dumb it down for us because I don't really understand it too well. I know that we need it, but I don't really understand it. But
In-depth,
again,
brilliant.
so for us, it's managing your perimeter. You're going to find us on your favorite podcast. You can check out our social media, Instagram, Facebook. And the thing is, if we've missed the boat on something, tell us, call us, because we want to hear all about it. And if you need us to expand on one of our episodes, like how we just had Jason on here, who could talk for hours, and we would let him talk for hours, please let us know.
No, actually, I got a correction to that. So our producer, Eric, who you heard for the first time today, actually chimed in a very intelligent question. He's super to have around. He keeps us going, keeps us on time. Well, maybe not. So send your comments to Eric and he'll figure it out.
Eric will handle it. But anyway, it's managing your perimeter, everyone. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you out there.
Bye-bye.